Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Phantom Thoughts podcast with me, your host, the Pink Phantom. I had originally prepared a first episode topic, something I wanted to talk about, and then I was listening to another podcast and have decided to go completely off book with something that I was inspired by there. On the July 2nd, 2022 episode of the Down in a Heat podcast, Rob C. mentioned in passing, it wasn't part of the main part of the episode, that he didn't understand why players liked critical hits because it worked against them. Now, this is not the first time I've heard that argument about critical hits, that it works against the players, that's a bad rule for the players, because the presumption is that the players face more opponents or the players face more attacks, whether it's in a combat or over the course of an adventure or campaign, and therefore there's more opportunities for the opponents to get a critical hit than for the players. And the second part of the argument is that while the players may vanquish a foe and move on, that critical hits doing more damage reduce their ability as that adventure or that session or that campaign goes on. I'm not sure the first part is true, that they're going to face more potential for critical hits than they themselves will have. And I'm also kind of dubious about how much of an effect that has in the long run, which is the other part of the argument. So first things first, they will face more critical hit opportunities than they will have critical hit opportunities. That is, rolling the dice to hit. Now, obviously, that's going to depend on the game system. If a game system doesn't have critical hits, of course, that doesn't apply. But I'm going to talk about mainly from a D&D system, D&D perspective. So, will the players face more attacks over the course of a session, an adventure, a campaign, than they themselves will have? Well, first we have to look at what's an attack. Because going by the book, rules as written, critical hits apply, the nat 20 effect of a critical hit applies to attacks. So you're shooting somebody with a bow. You're attacking somebody with a sword. Those type of things have critical hits. But spells don't. And from my perspective, the special abilities listed under the monsters are not necessarily attacks unless they specifically say they are attacks. So they also would not be subject to critical hits. So a lot of the higher damage things that monsters can do would not be considered attacks, and it's not an issue. The main special ability, if you will, of a monster that would produce more critical hits potentially is the multi-attack, where they get to use each of their claw attacks and a bite attack, or claw attacks and a tail attack, depending on the type of monster. But is that going to be more than the PCs themselves have? If you have 4 to 6 characters, at first level, are you going to throw a whole passel of people at them? I mean, they're going to have anywhere from D6 to D10 hit points. So at most 10, at the bottom end 1, and that'll be mitigated somewhat by any constitution bonuses. But you're not really going to put a whole horde of goblins against a 4 to 6 character party of first level characters. So in that situation, it's probably going to be more of a one-on-one. You're going to have monsters with a single attack, or maybe one monster with multiple attacks against the whole party. So to me, it's almost a wash. The opponent may have one more attack or one fewer attack. The players may have one more attack or one fewer attack. But it's going to be roughly even. It may not be exactly even in every combat. But over the course of an adventure, I think it kind of evens out. And at high level, players are more likely to be facing larger, more powerful opponents with more powerful attacks, but not as many of them. So, again, you've got a 4, 5, 6 member party facing a dragon or a giant or a beholder that have, in terms of the attacks subject to critical hits, 2 or 3 or 4, again, you're looking at about a wash. It's really only in the middle levels that you're going to throw potentially a larger number of creatures at PCs than the number of PCs that you have in the party. And so in that situation, they probably will start out with more attacks. Though, by those middle levels, some of the characters will have multiple attacks per attack action. But the flip side of that is that the reason you're throwing that many creatures at the PCs is because they're not going to last as long. So at the beginning of the battle, they have more attacks. In the middle of the battle, they may have the same number of attacks because the PCs have knocked them down. And then at the end of the battle, of course, the PCs will really be wailing away if things are going well. And whether they go well or not is really going to depend more on the overall rolling of the dice than just who's getting the most critical hits, because critical hits is 5%. 5% chance of getting that nat 20, doing that extra damage. Which brings us to, just in general, how do the dice roll? And there's no way to control that. I mean, if there's a session where the PCs roll bad, they roll bad. And it may not matter what kind of monsters or creatures you're throwing at them. They may just not do as well, or they may do very poorly indeed. But the critical hits themselves are probably not going to be as decisive. And I guess just as a little side note, if you're using the crit fail rules as well, then more attack rolls means more potential for crit fails. So that can be a mitigating factor as well. And then, of course, the biggest mitigating factor is the fact that PCs and creatures have abilities that have nothing to do with attacks. And in general, these tend to be more powerful than simply swinging a sword. It's one of the reasons why fighters at high levels are going to get 3 attacks, 4 attacks a turn, because that's one way to try to make them a little more relevant when the wizard is throwing a fireball or the dragon is using its breath weapon. So I think that ultimately, on a battle-by-battle basis, unless just the dice in general are working against the PCs, and I don't mean the dice have an intelligence say, yeah, we're going to stick it to them tonight, but just that's the way they roll, then I don't think it's a matter of, well, they've got that many more chances for crits, and it hurts the PCs. Now, as far as long-term campaign, module, what have you, going from one session to another session to another session, one battle to another battle to another battle, yes, the PCs get worn down. That's kind of the point. That's what happens in an adventure. That's why you have to, that's why the current version of the game has short rests and long rests, so PCs can recover. That's why they get magic items, to help them recover better with things like potions of healing, or to simply give them an opportunity to move on when they're a little worn down, because they've got a wand and they've got miscellaneous magic items that enable them to continue, that protect them better, that give them more abilities, more opportunities to continue going. And there's always going to be the time at any point, unless you have a total party kill, that you just have to go back to town. Now that's modern D&D. And it's offshoots. Now, if you're looking at an OSR type game, then to me, if you're using crits at all in an OSR game, because that's not necessarily a thing, it's moot. OSR games aren't supposed to be fair. OSR games are, hey, sometimes this encounter is beyond you. Hey, you're second level, and yeah, that's a dragon, and yeah, it's in the game, but that doesn't mean you're supposed to fight it. That's part of the OSR style, is knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them, knowing when to walk away, and knowing when to run. So I guess, in conclusion, I don't think crits are a rule that works against the PCs. I think it can be perceived that way. I think if you look at the math a certain way, it can be perceived that way. But I think when you take into account things that aren't attacks, damage that can be done, how the PCs power up, especially in a D&D 5 style game, or even 4 or 3, that it's all mitigated and it's all balanced out in the long run, as much as the dice rolls overall are balanced out. If the opponents roll well and the PCs roll poorly, sometimes that's the way the game goes. And sometimes the PCs will roll well and the monsters will roll poorly, and it'll be a cakewalk. That may be a different kind of fun. Or it may just be a basis for kicking off the next adventure or campaign. So that's what I think. What do you think? Let me know. You can leave me a message on Anchor. You can send me an email, thepinkphantom1@gmail.com. Or you can send me a tweet on Twitter @thepinkphantom. Until next time, these have been my Phantom Thoughts. The music in this episode was Strength of the Titans and Late Night Radio by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0.